Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
What we want to go over today is what? The immediate insertion appliance. Okay? Gotta fire this guy back up again. So the immediate insertion complete denture. And then we have another product we call an immediate insertion or a provisional denture called a stay plate. You can see that the numbers out here, the codes, the ADA codes are different. The idea with an immediate insertion complete denture with this code, 5130 for the upper and 5140 for the lower. If one uses that code in one's dental office for an immediate placement denture, what that tells the insurance company is this: if I use this code, this is considered a definitive appliance. So the insurance company will not pay their portion to remake the appliance for 5 years. And they won't pay to reline the appliance sooner than 6 months and 1 day. Okay? So if you use that code, 5130 or 5140. Now what we found over time, and I don't know how many people here either over the summer or over the fall have done an immediate placement stay plate. How many people have been through that? A third of you, a quarter of you. Now for many people that have done an immediate placement stay plate, what you may have found, and please share with your classmates, is many times at delivery your immediate placement stay plate fits like socks on a rooster. Can you picture Foghorn Leghorn with some socks coming up around his knees? The idea is not real well. And so the idea is you're doing the best you can, but anytime you make an immediate insertion appliance, there is no try-in for these, right? Because you're making a denture, but the patient doesn't have all their teeth out yet. Yeah? So there's no opportunity to try it in, and many times either because of poor fit or because of some aspect of the denture that the patient doesn't like the aesthetics, it's very common to want to remake that first generation appliance after there's been some healing. So what we typically do is rather than make the traditional immediate denture, we make something called a provisional complete denture or a stay plate, which is 5810, 5811, those codes. Now if that's the code you use, then what happens is some insurance companies will pay their piece of that, which you charge a lower fee for, which is why we use cheaper teeth for these. And they'll also pay for a definitive conventional denture some months later. Follow me there? It's like if you're doing operative dentistry, and sometimes if you do a really large amalgam and you're contemplating doing a crown on the tooth after you do the large amalgam, if you call that large amalgam an amalgam core, the insurance company will pay a piece of the amalgam core and then also pay a piece for the crown that goes on top of it. If you do that large amalgam and you code it and call it a large amalgam, not a core, but a large complex amalgam, and then you want to come back 4 months later and submit to do a crown on that tooth, the insurance company will not pay for the crown. Because you coded it as a definitive restoration, they say it's huge, but you coded it as a definitive restoration, so no, we're not paying for a crown because we already paid for fixing the tooth once. But you do the exact same filling, a big one, and code it as a core, and then come back and do the crown. They will pay their piece of the core and they'll pay their piece of the crown. Likewise for these, if it's coded as a stay plate, that's defined as a transitional or a provisional appliance. And then you can come back later and bill for a definitive appliance. The one caveat on this is Medicaid. Medicaid does not recognize or pay for stay plates. So for Medicaid, all dentures are created equal. And usually, unless there's extenuating circumstances, very often Medicaid does not pay for immediate insertion appliances. They do in some instances, but not all. Requires pre-approval. So what I've asked many patients to do, if they can, if the financial wherewithal is there, is pay for the immediate insertion provisional out of their own pocket. And then as far as the Medicaid paperwork is concerned, when you do the definitive denture, it's their first denture. So Medicaid never paid for the provisional, they did. And that means Medicaid will cover the definitive denture, which is more expensive. People follow the reason that I would even want to use this temporary denture code? Because for those of you that have done immediate placement dentures, it's very common that the fit of the appliance degenerates fairly quickly because of healing of the residual ridge. And many times, as much as you try to get the aesthetics dialed in, the patients are unhappy with some aspect of the aesthetics. And so when you go to do the second generation denture, you can check out the aesthetics, because for the second generation denture, you can do a wax try-in. You couldn't do that for the immediate because the teeth were still there, yeah? So the second generation denture lets you dial things in a lot closer, and I think patients are better served with that. So that's the idea with those. So basically, why would we do an immediate insertion denture? Anyway, why would we ever do a denture as opposed to trying to fix the teeth? Well, what if you say the remaining teeth are hopeless? With many patients, if they need a denture, it's pretty common today that they just don't want to go with no teeth for aesthetic or social reasons. Many, many years ago, around the Second World War or pre-World War II in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, it was not uncommon to recommend to people, if you need dentures, we're going to take all your teeth out and let you go with no teeth for 3 to 4 months to let the gums heal, and then we'll come back and make your dentures. Now, sociologically, in those days, they could get away with that a little more, but people aren't very happy to do that. The other thing is, let's say, if patients don't want to go without teeth, how much function can we expect with a lower immediate placement denture? Many times, I'm not the biggest fan of lower immediate dentures, because if you think of a maxillary immediate denture, if it's done the way we will suggest many times, you pull the posterior teeth, leave the anterior teeth intact, including the first bicuspids. You let the posterior part of the maxillary ridge heal up for 6 to 8 weeks. You take a new impression, then you take the rest of the teeth out and set things in. Cool. When the immediate denture is delivered, can you see that when the patient goes to function with it, as far as what's going to hold the denture up, because the denture's got to touch somewhere. On a maxillary denture, can you see that it can touch the entire roof of the mouth, the palate? And it can cover the back part of the gums, which has already healed. So the only part of the gums that have not healed that the denture would put pressure on is that part in the maxillary anterior area. People follow that okay? But for the upper denture, it's got a lot of other places to press on the gums that the teeth didn't just get pulled on. So they work reasonably well. Turn that around to the lower immediate denture. Depending on how many teeth were extracted at the time you delivered the lower immediate denture, because the lower is shaped like a horseshoe, can you see the only place it's got to rest is right where the teeth were extracted? So there's significant numbers of people that are not all that compliant with wearing their lower immediate denture. I do them all the time, but I want to really get patients' expectations decreased a little bit so that they're not expecting that they're going to leave school and eat $20 worth of jawbreakers on the way home. Okay, scares me right down to my socks if they say that. Now the other one is, do we need a reline after an initial period of healing? It's just about always mandatory that some sort of a reline is necessary. Now the catch-22 on immediate placement transitional stay plates is the money that the insurance company pays you to do that appliance includes the making of the appliance and any and all follow-up necessary for the first 4 to 6 months. So you can reline it with TrueSoft as often as you want, but that's on your nickel. You're not going to get paid for that. People follow that okay? So the longer I can have the patient using, let's say, denture adhesive in the case of a lower denture, and then if it gets really sloppy after 3 or 4 months and I switch over and put in a TrueSoft reline or reline it with Triad light cured material, then I don't have to redo those relines too often before it's time to remake the denture. So if one is going to reline the denture, if you start that right away, it's not that that's good or bad, but once you start relining it, you're not paid for that. It's just a service you're going to provide. And then you need to keep relining it. If it's a temporary soft reliner, you need to keep stripping that out and replacing it. Okay? Now, if you do a conventional immediate denture, that is the one like I said that I almost never do, the definitive appliance, eventually 6 months later you're going to need to reline that appliance. At some point when the gums change, you got to reline it. Now, if a lot of people wanted the immediate denture because they'd never wanted to be without teeth, if you've got the conventional immediate denture, The one that I talked about, basically that 5130 or 5140, because that's the definitive appliance. Eventually, when it comes time to reline that, you got to take your impression, take it away from the patient and send it to the lab, get it back from the lab and put it in. So with this traditional immediate denture, at the time you do the reline, it's going to be necessary to take the denture away from the person. If you do the stay plate, they continue to wear their stay plate during the entire time you're constructing the second generation denture. Follow that? So they're never without teeth. So long story short is basically I'm really a fan of doing transitional or temporary stay plates. They're not meant to last forever. They're meant to get my patient, get them through that period of time when their teeth are extracted, okay, and the gums get their initial healing. So when the gums do initial healing, okay, there have been studies that were done, basically, you know, Bergman, Carlson, a bunch of other people, that just looked, these were Scandinavian, where they looked at profiles of mandibles. So this was like a lateral ceph, and looking at the mental symphysis, the area in profile that just looks at that anterior part of the mandible, to just give you an idea that there's a tremendous amount of variability in these, but basically your first line sort of at the top is just a couple days after extraction, okay? Then your next line down here, your little dotted line, okay, 5 years after extraction and 21 years after extraction, where they could get that much data. So you can see with different people there's quite a bit of variability in the shape and the amount of resorption that goes on. Now the catch-22 on this is, let's say with some individuals, when you're doing an immediate placement denture, especially an immediate placement lower denture, any people that have ever been in oral surgery, when I come over to check the extraction site before you close the flap, anytime you have a situation, if you'd have something like this post-extraction, I would really like to see you take a rongeur and bone files and get this thing just so it's a real nice rounded edge down there. These tall spicule type ridges really tend to get sore a lot. So they're a pain in your butt because the patient's always back in your face saying, my gums hurt here. And you're forever relieving it, and it's just a problem. So at the time the teeth are extracted, take your time and be very conscientious about doing rongeurs and bone files or bone burrs or whatever. And don't leave ridges that sort of have spicule shapes at surgery if you can at all help it. Get things smoothed out. But the amount and the shape of resorption is variable a lot among patients. This is all on your handout, so you don't need to be writing furiously to write all this down. What I'm trying to give you an idea here is if one were to do that classic immediate denture, one that's meant to be a definitive appliance. These are the laboratory steps that you would take, and if one does the temporary appliance, those are the steps that it would take. Again, we try to keep the temporary appliance a little simpler. We use less expensive teeth. We try to make it attractive for the patient to go ahead and opt for that appliance. Now, some students past years have said, well, what if the patient doesn't come back to get the definitive appliance made? As long as this temporary denture is working okay for them and they're just out walking around, there's nothing wrong with that. These things don't blow up like the Mission Ridiculous after you hear the message in the phone booth. It blows the phone booth up after 7 seconds. Okay? These things don't self-destruct or blow up in 6 months and 2 weeks or something. So if the patient's doing okay with it, that's just fine, but the supposition is the patient's going to come on back and have a definitive denture made, and they're a little less, fewer fees. So what do we call basically the terminology for them? This just goes over it, and again, the 5810, 5811 is what you want to use. So basically, why do we want to use temporary appliances? Okay, immediate placement removable appliances. They allow extraction sites to heal prior to a definitive treatment. And the biggie is they give the patients an aesthetic replacement immediately, but also they allow a preview of the proposed treatment. Because many times when you make an immediate placement appliance, the patient will have some niggling complaint about the tooth position, the tooth shape, something. When you've got one of these transitional appliances, it's very easy to say, but Mr. Smith or Mr. Jones, remember that this is just meant to be a provisional. In 4 to 6 months when we make your definitive appliance, we're going to be able to do a full wax try-in with the real teeth, and we can really dial the aesthetics in a lot closer. We couldn't do that with this one because remember your teeth were in the way. When we made this, you still had your own teeth. So that's the biggie that it gives us with that. So again, why might we recommend removing a patient's remaining teeth? So those of you that are up in clinic, how many people have had a patient that's a Medicaid patient that when you did the treatment plan and screened them, you thought that basically there were some teeth that could be saved, but what did the patient say? All I want is what Medicaid will pay for. If it costs me $3 out of my own pocket, I don't want it. Now, it may be that the population of patients in a dental school is not the same as the population of patients you will see in private practice. Nonetheless, there are some patients who, for economic reasons, will make the choice not to do restorations on their remaining teeth. Because as you do your comp care presentations, many of these patients you see that if they have many compromised teeth, even at dental school fees, the cost for doing amalgams and composites on many of these patients, even if you just throw in a temporary partial, a flipper, winds up being over $2,500 to $3,000. And for a lot of patients, that's just not on the list as far as their discretionary income. So one of the reasons you might do the removal of patients' teeth and put in some sort of a denture is straightforward economics. The other is always condition, of the remaining teeth. So again, there's many teeth that we can save, but they're rotted off at the gum line. Patients got ring around the rosy caries. They're sucking on 12 Mountain Dews a day, sucking on lifesavers because their breath stinks, because their teeth are so rotten, and it's all a downward spiral. So there may be condition of the teeth that are a big issue. Patient factors. And as always, a lot of this stuff winds up being driven by insurance coverage. It just is. So when you're talking with patients, again, if you sort of try to do a representation of what your concept of what the patient's need is, and the patient's concept of what their need is, everybody's familiar with these little circles that either overlap or don't overlap, and they call them Venn diagrams, V-E-N-N. So many times we have the assumption that the two circles, our supposition and the patient's, have significant amounts of overlap or they're nearly coincident. But many times from the dentist's point of view, what really is going on is this. The patient has this idea of what they think they want, and you have your idea of what they think they want, and they don't even touch. And that's where many times if you have a transitional appliance, it makes sure you're on the same page. So here's a patient many times that would come in and say, okay, are we going to do an immediate placement appliance? And this, I can't make this stuff up, this really happened. So when I say on there, my fiance told me I had to get my teeth fixed before the wedding. And when I get down here, what's your main question? What's your main question? Who would marry this guy? You going to French kiss this guy? Yum. So my question is, how the heck did they ever even get engaged? But that's, this is really what the person said. So anyway, there may be some individuals that depending on the amount of dough they want to spend, and this person didn't happen to have it, but I have had patients historically whose teeth looked like this, and they absolutely couldn't or wouldn't spring for the money to fix the teeth. But in the parking lot, when this person came in, if I saw patients on Fridays sometimes, and the parking lot wasn't very full, they had the biggest Chevy Suburban that's made, and they had a giant trailer on the back of it with 4 snowmobiles that they call machines. If you're a snowmobiler, it's like I got 2 machines. And so they're on their way up north with their machines to do a weekend of snowmobiling in the Upper Peninsula. So for a lot of people, it's not necessarily that they do or don't have the money. It's what are certain individuals willing to spend their money on. So there's having the money, and then there's having the dental IQ or the desire or the feeling that you want to put your money towards your teeth. And many people have the dough, but they don't necessarily feel that it needs to go toward their teeth. So if you're going to do one of these immediate placement dentures, first requirement, and people that are around me know that I am just an absolute ogre when it comes to preliminary impressions. Because in the case of the immediate denture, the impression is your final master cast many times. Now for this one, I would usually presume that it would be my preference to get some of these back teeth out, maybe the molar, and maybe a second bicuspid, and maybe a second bicuspid to leave a first bicuspid to first bicuspid. The idea being that if you leave a first bicuspid, it gives you a reference for vertical dimension, so when you go to take your biting relationships, you know what the chin-nose distance needs to be. You with me there? But if you leave too many teeth, and I'll ask this to students a lot, again, if you're going to be the person delivering the immediate denture yourself up in oral surgery, and I see this periodically, and students bring me casts, and they've got like 12 teeth on the top and 12 teeth on the bottom, and they're almost rotted through at the gum line. So the second you put a forceps on them and try to tweak them, you know where that's going. They're going to break off level with the gum or a millimeter below the gum, yeah? We all there? And I appreciate you people are reasonably skilled. Do you think, because you know by the time you get checked out in oral surgery, you're not okay to give the patient anesthetic until what, about 9:30? If oral surgery starts at 9 o'clock? So when they're numb and you really start to lay a flap, it's now about 10 o'clock. So I don't think you guys are good enough between 10 and noon to get 26 teeth out and deliver 2 dentures and make sure the gums are nice. I think a resident has a hard time doing that. So sometimes by taking more posterior teeth out, you're trying to leave yourself less work to do the day the denture has to go in, if you're the one pulling the teeth. Get it? And so some of these, just from a practical point of view, is get rid of some of the posterior teeth. With more posterior teeth gone, it also gives you a better opportunity to get a nice impression in this area. But the main takeaway message here is, if you're doing an immediate placement denture, your alginate impression is your master cast. It's got to be a good one. It's got to get nice peripheral rolls. It's got to get nice tuberosity areas back by the hamming notches. And so of the handout that you've got, you look in your books, in your textbook, it gives you, and we give you references for pages that show an edentulous arch and points out the different anatomy that it's got. And the reason that we want you to know the different anatomy and why it's important is very often you'll walk up to your faculty and what do you say? Gee, do you think my alginate impression's okay? What's my question back to you? Do you think it's okay? Do you know your anatomy? Do you know what structures you're trying to capture in the impression? If you don't, leave clinic, send your patient home, figure out what the hell you were supposed to know before you showed up today, have them back in and take an alginate so you can make some determination on, do you have the required anatomy? I'm always more than happy if a person says, gee, Dr. Shotwell, I've tried this 3 times and I'm really having a hard time getting this tuberosity area. Or I'm always getting a void or a bubble up here in the anterior region so I don't get the depth of vestibule very good up there. Could you help me get that? Because I've tried twice, my patient's sort of gagging and I'm having a hard time with that. No problem. It's not about whether you ask a question or not, is does the question you ask seem to be at least reasonably informed, like you had some idea what you were trying to get, you're just having trouble getting it. As opposed to, well, I'm here, what you doing today? Well, I'm sort of, I'm doing it. It's sort of like, God, that just irritates me to no end. For how much you're paying to be here, it's like, God, the more prepared you are for clinic, the more you're going to get out of it, okay? Same with the lower. Now, what I see people with lower impressions coming up short on all the time is the lateral throat form area. And there are ways to get that, and then when you pour the impression up, what I see most commonly back in the lab is there's this mesa of stone in the tongue space that comes up about even with the top of the retromolar pads. So you sort of have this information down here, but it's never possible to access it because there's all this stone in the tongue space that goes halfway to the ceiling of the lab. So whoever teaches you or doesn't teach you how to physically pour models when you're sophomores, it's not getting through, however that happens. And so talk to your faculty about getting some help with pouring models if you need to. But the model needs to be good. So there's the famous tongue space, and there's a way to clear that out as poured so that you can have nice access to that. And that's, then you get the case mounted. Now, many times when you're doing immediate placement stay plates, the frustration is it's hard enough to get the impression, but then everybody wants to take a caulking gun of PVS, the blue bite, and then gun about a tennis ball size of blue bite in there and have them sort of mush down, and that's my real accurate bite. Because I've seen them do that in practice and it works really sweet. Ours really works sweet. In students, in my experience, and it's just this, everybody ever seen Monty Python's Flying Circus, know what I'm even talking about? And periodically there's that big foot that just comes out and stomp everything. So some student says, well, in my experience, I want to have that foot just go, your experience? What, you've done 2 of these? Maybe? Give me a break. God, your experience? So anyway, what we want to do is, how many people have taken a blue bite and mounted it? How many people have done that? And then you notice when you're trying to articulate your casts in the blue bite, there's anywhere from 1.5 to 4 millimeters of like vertical bounce where this stuff bounces up and down. It's like, really accurate. You know, I love that. Shim stock, look out. So anyway, what many times you got to do to get your bite taken is you got to pour the models up and make a record base and have a whole nother appointment to get the bite. And if that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do. Okay? So again, if I leave first bicuspids, I can go ahead and get a vertical dimension idea of how these things need to come together. So we get good models, we get the thing mounted up. Then if necessary, we make a record base. For this one, it happens to be a single upper immediate. So we go ahead and make the record base. We take a bite with record bases. Here it happens to be aluwax. If I take an aluwax occlusal registration, I get a nice registration that does not have 1.5 to 3 millimeters of vertical bounce. I can mount the maxillary cast and get ready to go ahead and make my single immediate denture in this case. Again, what we talked about is when you're going to select teeth, this says new hue and classic. So in that sample laboratory write-up that you had, okay, there we talked about having new hue teeth. Well, these are the same shapes of teeth. The classic teeth is what we use here. And the idea is the classic teeth come in all the same colors that the portrait, the fancier teeth do. So they're the same shape. Whereas if you use the new hue teeth, they're a couple dollars cheaper, not a lot, but they come in a more limited shade palette. So I thought instead of paying $4 for the 6 anterior teeth, we'll pay $6 for the 6 anterior teeth, but have all the shades available to you. So you go ahead and the pictures in these books are 1-to-1, they're life size, and so you can hold your cast. Many times if the teeth aren't completely destroyed on your cast, you can take your cast and hold it up to this booklet to get an idea of the size and shape of the teeth. And then here's the more definitive portrait teeth. Okay, so this is for temporary stay plates and temporary flippers. This is for definitive appliances. Okay, so again, 6 anterior teeth out of this one cost about $50. 6 anterior teeth out of this one cost about $6. So we're just trying to cut our costs. Okay, and here are some of the basic pictures, a close-up of the pictures, and you look at these little numbers that are written over to the left-hand side of the teeth. And I'm not going to read this to you, but there's a lot of information given there, and when in doubt, what all these numbers mean are explained in that little booklet. So if you're real bored some night, after the Super Bowl or whatever, and you literally take that little booklet and don't just look at the pictures of the teeth, read the text. There's not much of it. I mean, it's an easy read. It's easier than a comic book. Read the text that's at the back of it, and that will explain to you how to use the front half of the book. And you people are bright. I know that. I mean, if you spend 12 minutes reading this booklet at the back, you're going to be totally wrapped tight as can be on picking teeth out. It's not a hard thing to do, but just look at that mold guide. And then there's going to be a little chart in the back of it. And again, this is all explained in the booklet. Now, the one thing we don't always go over in the booklet is here at school, we typically have you use 10-degree teeth or functional teeth for the maxillary posterior and 0-degree teeth for the lower arch. Okay? And again, you've got a PowerPoint of this, so you don't need to look it up. But when you're looking up posterior teeth, which posterior teeth go with which anterior mold, so you pick out an anterior mold here, and it tells you go across the chart, it tells you which lower front teeth go with it, and which posterior teeth go with it. So all you're looking for posterior teeth is functional or 10-degree teeth for the upper, and 0-degree or rational teeth for the lower. That's the standard combination that we'll set for lingualized occlusion. The shade guide is there's that denture shade guide, that's the portrait shade guide, that's the larger one. Now the numbers on the portrait shade guide are the same codes that they are on the Vita shade guide. and the shades are pretty close, but the Vita shade guide is specifically engineered to go with Vita porcelain, meaning for PFM crowns. And there are some extremely subtle differences sometimes in the shades between the Vita shade guide and the portrait shade guide. They're awfully close, but when it comes for denture work, okay, or partial denture work, tend to use the portrait shade guide because it's really set up for the teeth. So what do they do at the lab? You'll have some faculty that you work with that really want you to cut the teeth off the model and sculpt the shape of the gums to look the way you think they're going to look after the teeth are extracted. So with some faculty, they would say, when this case is mounted up, we've got the pin set, I want you to grind all these teeth off and resculpt the gums, and then maybe just draw a line on the lower teeth where the midline was and how much overlap there was. Then we just cut all the teeth off and send the lab a smooth model, and they will start setting their teeth. My preference is to go ahead and send the lab the cast with the teeth on it and trust the lab to one tooth at a time, cut the teeth off and set the replacement teeth so that I'm using the remaining teeth as a template or a guide as to where the replacement teeth should go. Now, can you see, if you just use common sense, if the existing teeth the patient has because of periodontal involvement are splayed and really crooked, that those teeth aren't necessarily giving you a lot of information that's useful? Common sense, you follow me? So in that case, you may go ahead and just cut the teeth off and smooth off the cast because the teeth are not providing very much useful information for where to set the denture teeth. People follow that okay? But if the teeth are in reasonable alignment and look not that bad, but they need to come out, well, then I would tend to leave the anterior teeth on the cast as a guide for the laboratory. And again, when you're talking to your faculty that you work with, different faculty have different feelings about that. So here's another case, a different one in which we show we cut one tooth off, we reshape the cast, and we set a replacement tooth so it lines up. And we do that one tooth at a time until we get the anterior teeth set. We get the posterior teeth set. Then the other thing we typically want to do is to scribe a posterior palatal seal or a post dam in our cast. I like to do this myself before I send it to the dental laboratory. That's one thing I do like to do myself. And I just do a mechanical post dam so it's cut into the cast with an acrylic burr. Okay, the medium-sized acrylic burr. So here's the case all waxed up. We get it processed. We go ahead and do a split cast or a post-processing occlusal correction. When that's done, the people basically finish things off and return it to us. So, okay, here's a patient ready to get their teeth out in oral surgery. So we do a nice job in oral surgery. Now, the one thing I want you to notice about this case, can you see that the sutures do a pretty good job of being like a continuous mattress suture? So it does a good job of bringing the two parts of the flap together to get pretty good apposition of the flap. Can you see up there that the areas of the edentulous alveolar ridge have been smoothed down so that things are really quite smooth and there's no real irregular humps or bumps? That ain't rocket science. When you're gloved up in surgery and you pull the teeth, take your gloved finger and go around and feel that edentulous ridge real firmly. And if you feel anything that feels like a real crisp edge or a sharp corner, round it over. If you feel a big bump, cut it off with a round, whatever, get rid of it. So that when you then bring your flap back down and you suture it, you go over there with the gloved hand and there's no sharp edges or spicules sticking out anywhere. Okay, we okay on that? When you go ahead and deliver it, here's 24 hours recall. So where do you need to adjust it? This is what's known as an intraoral ulcer. Okay, that's a completely ulcerated area. Inside the mouth, they look whitish. It's real common to see those in these areas. How come? What's there on your dentate cast before you cut the teeth off? Everybody take your fingers and feel your own face right there and feel how big those bumps are right there. So those bumps are pretty prominent. And a lot of times when those cuspids come out, that area needs to be crushed in, cut out the interdental septum and crush it in, or recontour that so you don't have these giant undercuts. Okay? So basically, here's a patient that we did a maxillary immediate denture for, had him back in. You can see that on many of these, it is possible to get pretty reasonable aesthetics. And this is a young lady, I did this probably about 25 years ago. She stiffed me and never came back for the definitive denture. So the temporary one was working good enough for her that she just never showed up to have the real one done. And it's not that that's a good or a bad thing. So basically, what am I saying? Your post-insertion adjustments are really made easier if it all starts with a great impression. So if you want to see me just go nuts, it's when you're taking preliminary impressions, bring me up a really horrible impression and say, oh, it's just a prelim. And I will guarantee you I will flip. Okay? So it all starts with a really, really good impression.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.